Today, I'll share the story of two women abandoned at hospitals and two suspects charged with murder. The case of Christy Giles and Hilda Marcela Cabrales that occurred in Los Angeles in 2021. On November 13, 2021, around 4:30 p.m., security cameras at Southern California Hospital's emergency room captured a troubling scene. A black vehicle stopped in front of the hospital, and two masked men carried an unconscious woman to the hospital entrance. Notably, the vehicle had no license plates, and the two men disappeared without leaving their names or contact information. About 90 minutes later, the same vehicle arrived at another hospital just 10 minutes away, where they dropped off another unconscious woman before leaving again. The first woman left at the hospital was 24-year-old model Christy Giles, who was already deceased. The second woman was 26-year-old architect Hilda Marcela, who was in critical condition. What had happened to these two women? Why were they abandoned at hospitals? 24 hours before the incident, Christy had been enjoying the sunset at Venice Beach with her cat, Panther, sending her last photos to her husband, Jan Cilliers. While Jan was away visiting his father, Christy had planned a girls' night out with her friend Hilda. Christy was an international model, contracted with the Wilhelmina agency, who had traveled the world for fashion shoots before making Los Angeles her home. At 21, she met Jan, a South African-born artist and special effects editor 17 years her senior. They fell for each other instantly, and after 7 months together, they eloped at Burning Man Festival in the Nevada desert, deciding that life is short and marrying the very next day after proposing to each other. Hilda was a talented architect who had graduated with highest honors from Monterrey University in Mexico and had moved to LA for her dream job. She became friends with Christy through interior design studies. On the evening of November 12, 2021, the two women began their night at Soho House in West Hollywood, then moved to a warehouse party after midnight to see a favorite DJ. Shortly after, security cameras captured Christy and Hilda, leaving the warehouse party with three men: 39-year-old David Pierce, 42-year-old Brant Osborne, and 47-year-old Michael Ansbach. According to text messages discovered later, Hilda had suggested doing cocaine to Christy, who agreed, and witnesses testified that Pierce had provided that cocaine. The group arrived at Pierce's apartment around 5 a.m. 30 minutes later, Christy texted Hilda a surprised eyes emoji with the message, "Let's go." Hilda replied that she would call an Uber, saying it would arrive in 10 minutes. However, that Uber waited outside Pierce's home for 5 minutes before leaving empty. These were the last messages the two women ever sent. On the day of the incident at 4:30 p.m., a nearby surveillance camera faintly captured Pierce carrying Christy's body down the stairs on his shoulder. Osborne was carrying her bag. 35 minutes later, hospital cameras recorded Pierce wearing a black hoodie as he removed Christy's body from the car, with Osborne watching from the side. An hour and a half after that, another dark video showed the two men bringing Hilda out of the apartment. Pierce was carrying her, and Osborne had her boots and coat. 30 minutes later, the black vehicle arrived at the second hospital, where both men were captured taking Hilda out of the car together. It had been 13 hours since Christy had texted Hilda. Christy's mother was devastated by the news of her daughter's death. Hilda remained on life support for 2 weeks, but with no chance of recovery, her family decided to donate her organs. The medical staff lined the halls to honor her final gift. Autopsy results revealed cocaine, ecstasy, and lethal levels of fentanyl in Hilda's system. Shockingly, the downstairs neighbor had heard someone, presumed to be Hilda, moaning in pain for 6 hours. Yet Pierce, Osborne, and Ansbach, all present at the scene, never called for help. The investigation team tracked the registration information of the black Prius captured on surveillance cameras and confirmed David Pierce's address, which matched the location Christy had sent to her husband Jan in text messages before her death. Based on this, detectives identified Pierce as the main suspect and headed to his residence. There, investigators found the same vehicle seen on hospital surveillance cameras. Pierce lived on the second floor with his roommate, Osborne. When investigators knocked on the door and identified themselves, the lights immediately went out. About 15 minutes later, Osborne emerged, but Pierce appeared to be out. Initially, Osborne denied that Christy and Hilda had been at the apartment, but investigators quickly identified contradictions. After obtaining a search warrant and applying pressure, he admitted the women had been there. He claimed he had been asleep and upon waking, discovered that Christy and Hilda were unconscious. He said he and Pierce decided to go to 2 separate hospitals because they were worried it would look suspicious. No evidence to prove the crime was found at the scene, and investigators needed to locate Pierce to continue their investigation. The team began tracking his whereabouts through phone records, family contacts, and vehicle location services. Surprisingly, a few days later, Pierce voluntarily came to the police station, offering to cooperate with the investigation. He adamantly denied that the Prius captured on surveillance cameras was his vehicle, but when pressed with the matching registration information, he finally admitted ownership. As the investigation continued, Pierce's dark past began to emerge. He had been investigated twice for sexual assault charges in 2014 and 2020. In those cases, the victims had awakened with memory loss due to drugs. But by the time they received hospital examinations, the substances had already metabolized in their systems. Without proof of forced drugging or intent, the cases were never prosecuted. Similarly, both Christy and Hilda showed signs of sexual assault after drug intoxication, but proving they had been forcibly drugged seemed difficult. The case would become extremely complicated if Pierce and Osborne claimed the women had taken the drugs voluntarily. The investigation team needed to quickly secure evidence of Christy and Hilda's final movements before surveillance footage was deleted. They obtained video from outside the warehouse party showing the 2 women leaving with Pierce, Osborne, and Ansbach. They also found text messages from the party where Hilda suggested cocaine to Christy, and they did it together. The crucial evidence was the timeline captured on security cameras, the group arriving at Pierce's apartment around 5 a.m., then 11 hours later at 4:30 p.m., Pierce carrying Christy down the stairs on his shoulder, dropping her body at the hospital 35 minutes later, and 90 minutes after that taking Hilda to the second hospital. As evidence mounted, the investigation team finally arrested David Pierce, Brant Osborne, and Michael Ansbach on December 15, 2021. The police still didn't have complete knowledge of exactly what had happened inside the apartment, but the detectives strategically began their interrogations. The team interrogated the 3 men in rotation, which proved psychologically effective. 2 months after their arrest, Ansbach provided crucial testimony to the police. He stated that Pierce had given the women special cocaine, causing everyone to become sick immediately, and that later Ansbach discovered Christy had no vital signs. The most shocking part was that Pierce repeatedly said, "Dead girls don't talk." As the investigation continued, police found women who could testify against Pierce, and on January 9, 2025, the trial began with Pierce charged with felony murder and Osborne charged as an accessory after the fact. Prosecutors argued that Pierce had deliberately administered drugs to the 2 women and that Osborne had helped destroy evidence. Forensic evidence included drugs found in the women's systems and Pierce's DNA. To prove murder, however, the prosecution needed to demonstrate that Pierce had committed similar acts against other women. Pierce's defense emphasized that the women had voluntarily taken drugs, denying the murder charges. Nevertheless, prosecutors brought 7 victims to the witness stand to demonstrate Pierce's pattern of behavior. They testified that Pierce had offered them drugged drinks and attempted to sexually assault them. A total of 20 women came forward to testify about Pierce's crimes, and investigators estimated the actual number of victims could reach 100. Finally, Ansbach testified that on the day of the incident, Pierce had provided special cocaine to the women. And when he discovered Christy wasn't breathing, Pierce said, "Dead girls don't talk." Pierce and Osborne testified, maintaining their innocence, but the prosecutor argued they were responsible for the victims' deaths. Now their fate was in the jury's hands. On February 4, 2025, the jury found Pierce guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 7 counts of sexual assault, sentencing him to life in prison. However, the jury couldn't reach a consensus regarding Osborne, resulting in a mistrial. Prosecutors are gathering stronger evidence for a retrial scheduled for December 2025. Just as Pierce had said, the dead girls couldn't talk, but the evidence they left behind and the voices of others ultimately brought justice to this case.